Hurricane Hugo, 1989. We stayed with a family who was going to stay in their home as Hurricane Hugo, once a Category 5 hurricane, was going to hit the coast of South Carolina as a Category 4. We stayed with this family, and as the hurricane passed over us and became intense, the house was shaking. Piers were coming out of the water nearby and hitting the house and shaking it. The women of the family began to cry. Then the eye passed over us. At daybreak, everything was calm. We walked out into the morning light, and the house 2 doors down was gone. It could have been us. While working for network newsrooms in my career, I went to many hurricanes. We were going in as other people were going out. I can't even remember all of the hurricanes that I was sent to cover. So I'll give you snippets of stories, some specifics, because I have some notes in front of me about hurricanes in the past few years. And I'll try to give you some good stories about what we went through. I remember when I was with NBC correspondent Jim Cummins years ago, late 80s, I would say, where a hurricane passed over Galveston Island. And we had to go down to Galveston Island to the flagship hotel built on a pier sticking out from the city of Galveston at the seawall. And but it was nighttime, and I was the video editor for this trip. And in those days, we had to edit on heavy Betacam machines. So I had a rental Cadillac full of Beta machines, which are very heavy. The Cadillac was weighed down. And Jim and I, after dark, when we were hearing that the causeway, the bridge to Galveston Island, was closed, we struck out to get to the flagship hotel. And it was pouring rain. I mean, it was driving rain. And I was driving. Jim was next to me, the car filled with Betacam machines, and it was late at night, probably 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And as we approached the bridge, nobody stopped us. And as I started up the bridge, the winds increased. The rain was horizontal, coming from my left as I was going south across the bridge. And it was so strong, the wind was so strong, that it wanted to push our car off the side of the bridge. And I had to steer into the wind a little bit and crab, sliding, but because I had the nose pointed to my left, toward the left railing, the car was slipping, and all I could do was try and stay on the bridge. Of course, there was railing on the right side, but I didn't want to test it. And we thought we were going to die up there on crossing that causeway, crabbing, sliding over the bridge, in effect, by pointing the nose into the left rail a little bit, not completely 90 degrees, more like 10 or 15 degrees to our left, and the car would slide, but fortunately, we were crabbing like an airplane would, trying to get across that bridge. We were creeping along, thinking that we're going to be blown off the bridge. But we made it somehow. We got across that bridge and made it to the flagship hotel on a pier sticking out from the seawall at Galveston Island. A night Jim and I will never forget in our lives. Now, I began talking in this podcast about staying with a family when Hurricane Hugo was coming in shore in South Carolina. A family said they were going to stick it out, so we stuck it out with them. This is 1989, according to the notes I have on screen here in front of me. I became a hurricane on September 13th, Category 5 at one point, and headed toward South Carolina. We were right in its path. And at some point before midnight, we dared to go outside, but we were risking our lives. We were being blown by very high winds. We had to hold on to things for dear life to get back into the house. And as we waited out the storm, the house was shaking, and the piers, we were close to the water. We were just maybe 100 feet away from the beach, and piers were coming out of the water and slamming against the house and shaking the house. The ladies of the family began to cry. I don't blame them. And we were, we thought we had pushed our luck too far. But as it turns out, the eye of the storm passed over us around midnight. And we walked outside. Because the eye was over us, we could see stars in the sky. The water was gently lapping. Very pleasant to walk around. But about 20 minutes later, the other side of the wall of the eye of the hurricane hit us, and it went back to very dangerous conditions with the house shaking and piers hitting the house, other houses, and it was an incredible, incredible night. But at first light, the winds had calmed, and Jim and I dared to walk outside. Now, you have to know that the houses along this beach were built by sailors. They were built with timber boards and what have you, and they were fitted together, not nailed. Fitting the structure of the house was a lot more sturdy than nails, and this is how the sailors built those houses, because they knew that from time to time a hurricane could come in. And despite the sturdiness of these homes, the house 2 doors down, the second house from us, was simply gone. I mean, the lot where it sat was just empty with a few boards laying around. And parts of that house were scattered for, I don't know, quarter mile away inland because of the strength of the winds. Never forget that night. Okay, what other storms we have here in front of me? I see names. How about Hurricane Katrina in 2005? I was not there for the landfall of Hurricane Katrina. I covered the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. I was based in Houston at the time, and people leaving New Orleans were coming to housing around Houston, and I covered that a lot. I can tell you that I'll never forget seeing Tom Brokaw. I think it was Tom. It might have been Brian Williams. So maybe I say I won't forget, but apparently I'm fuzzy in my memory. It might have been Brian. They had stayed in the stadium where sports was played in New Orleans. And when they came out of the stadium after Katrina passed, Brian or Tom Brokaw, I don't remember which, was talking about showing that the water was up to his knees, and he was speculating on the flooding around New Orleans, because New Orleans is supposed to be protected by a seawall, but much of New Orleans is below sea level. A lot of water, if you remember, came over that seawall. A lot of water drowned a lot of people. A lot of people were trapped. They were on their roofs. There are sad, sad stories about the aftermath of Katrina. What other hurricanes do I remember? They all become a blur, actually, but I can tell you, I have been to New Orleans and that area for other hurricanes. I'll never forget NBC put me on a charter flight to get me to New Orleans because a hurricane was coming in. I don't remember which. And the office manager of our NBC bureau that was in Houston had arranged for a rental van for me and my sound man and a producer to chase his hurricane. Well, it was coming right into New Orleans, so we were prepared. She got us the van at a Ford dealership, I think, because all the rental cars had been taken. But we got this van, and the hurricane began changing course, turning to the right, turning toward the east, because it was coming into from the south into New Orleans, but it started veering toward the east. We started chasing that hurricane around the coast all the way into Tampa, Florida. It kept changing course. And there's a picture of me that you'll see if you watch this podcast with pictures on my website of themostexclusiveclub.com. I'll include that picture. Someone took a picture from behind me as I'm on a pier, my back to the camera, my sound man next to me, his back to the camera. But from the camera sees our backs, but it sees the big wave in front of us of the water hitting the pier that we were standing on. It's a dramatic picture. All right, and that hurricane was coming into Tampa, Florida, when it changed its mind again, turned around, and started heading back to New Orleans. We had to abandon the van because we couldn't get back to New Orleans fast enough. So NBC arranged for a charter flight again. And in the middle of the night, we flew from Tampa back to New Orleans. You know, and once we got to New Orleans, I don't know what vehicle we had to drive, but somewhere magically something appeared for us to get the coverage of the hurricane coming into New Orleans. And it was not, by that time, it had tapered off in its strength, and it was not a big deal. But we had to call the Ford dealership and said, hey, you can pick up your van in Tampa, Florida. Send us the bill. Oh, man. What other hurricane experiences? So many. There was another time, and it was south of New Orleans, right on near the water. I actually tied a rope to a tree to me and my camera to do live shots. for the networks so that either me or my camera wouldn't be blown away. And another time in South Texas on the coast, a hurricane was coming in, and I was doing live shots, but I was doing it where the camera was behind a building that gave us some wind protection. The correspondent, only a few feet in front of me, was outside of the protection of that building. And boy, was he buffeted. And we were on the satellite where MSNBC would come to us live every short while for an update. And so back at NBC, they were watching us as long as we were standing there between live shots. And it turned out that the Tonight Show, which was Jay Leno at the time, on the Tonight Show that night, Jay Leno had a little fun with running some video of our correspondent standing there being buffeted between live shots, and he was just knocked around like crazy. And they had a big laugh about that. But hurricanes, tornado aftermaths, I have been to cities that have been hit by tornadoes after the tornado, of course. Twice I've been to a small town where nothing was left higher than my knee in the entire small town. Twice that had to happen. I spoke of being chartered everywhere. That was back when the New York newsrooms of the big networks had a lot of freelance money. And I can't tell you how many times I was shuttled to a shoot in a chartered jet. I'll never forget, we had been chartered, my soundman and I, to Beaumont, where, unfortunately, a sad story, a church bus full of kids was involved in a head-on collision that killed everyone. It's very sad, very, very sad story. But we were coming back and had a little time to stand around in front of the Learjet that we were going to take back. And we were talking to the pilot, and he described the Learjet as a yard dart with a jet engine. And now I'm sort of deflecting into stories about chartered jets, of which I wrote many. We were going into East Texas, landing at the airstrip for a small college, but we had to clear the trees, and I'll never forget those pilots got down right over the trees, and as soon as they crossed the edge of the trees, they dropped the plane onto the runway and hit the brakes, and we came to a stop right at the end of the runway. It was another adventure taking off from there. They got back as far as they could and poured the power to it, holding the brakes until they got maximum power, released the brakes, and I could feel the grass under the end of the runway just as we lifted off. A lot of adventures there. We were chartered up to Des Moines, Iowa, when that L-1011 crashed in, I can't tell you, the late 80s. This is if you may remember, it was an L-1011 has three engines. One is right at the tail of the plane underneath the vertical stabilizer, and a fan in the engine came apart and cut the hydraulic lines, and the pilot had no control other than to manipulate the power of the engines on each wing. More power to the right wing would make it bank left. More power to the left wing would make it bank right. More power to both engines would make it climb. Less power to descend. You'd find a place to keep it level, but it was an incredible job of getting that plane on the ground by that pilot. And it was still a rough landing. But if I remember correctly, about 2/3, 3/4 of the passengers and pilots survived that landing. And so at the hospital, I was the camera on that pilot for all the networks. He came out in a wheelchair because he had been injured. I wish I could remember his name. But he was celebrated as a hero, much like Sully was when he landed in the Hudson. I had nothing to do with that story, though, so I can't tell you any stories about that comes from personal experience. So working for the networks on a freelance basis, boy, the adventures. And I'm sure I'm leaving out a lot of things. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening to The Most Exclusive Club. Also remember donsmith.tv as in television, DONSMITH.T as in Tango, V as in Victor, to see my portfolio. I have a YouTube channel where these podcasts are also posted, but with some pictures at themostexclusiveclub.com. Thank you for listening to The Most Exclusive Club. I'm Don Smith.